𝐄𝐗𝐓𝐑𝐄, is humanity going to free itself? The first time I did this channeling, 𝐄𝐗 was quite upset and somewhat angry that the situation on Earth just keeps dragging on. As a result, the information laid out wasn't super clear, and it also wasn't a satisfying rant or anything like that. 𝐄𝐗 and I agreed to redo the channeling a few days later. This is the second, more cool-headed version of this channeling. I write this to indicate that the galactics aren't unfazed by what is happening on Earth. They do care. Here's today's message from 𝐄𝐗. My dear Earth friends, this is 𝐄𝐗 speaking. I know the situation on Earth is very tough, and so I hope that you are doing relatively okay. There are probably about 10,000 good-hearted beings who would like to be channeled, for every one reliable channeler on Earth. Hence I am grateful for the opportunity that I can once again talk to you. Hawken shared an important message last week, titled, Hawken, Debunking the Liberation Process Has to Be This Way. In it, he called on the higher-up gray hats to start taking action very soon, and said that if they fail to do so, the galactics may arrest these higher-up gray hats and have them face a galactic court, either for conventional crimes or for oath-breaking. This led to some questions. Fair enough. I would like to give some clarifications and share some context. First of all, if a random Joe breaks their oath, we're not going to arrest him and drag him in front of a galactic court. The situation with the higher-up gray hats specifically was that they usually swore an oath to defend either the Constitution or the people, and after their oath they were given power or command over other people. If they then break their oath, they're effectively controlling other people without consent or justification. At that point, they're yet another controller, violating the free will of other people. So if you prefer, instead of dragging oath-breaking higher-up gray hats in front of a galactic court, you can also think of it as dragging those people in front of a galactic court who have controlled or commanded people without justification. And the moment they broke their oath to protect the people or the Constitution, is probably the moment they became a controller, who violated free will. A gray hat general might try to defend themselves by saying, "Yes, I failed to uphold my oath to defend the Constitution. However, the people who I continued to command chose willingly to serve under me." This doesn't really work in our eyes, because the people under them had a reasonable expectation that their superior was in fact upholding his oath. Also, in the army you can't really ask your superior if he is actually upholding his oath, or disobey him just because you suspect he might not be upholding his oath. It's not like a commanding officer ever tells the people under him, "I've decided to break my oath to protect the Constitution. Do you wish to continue obeying my orders? If not, no problem. You won't get in trouble if you now stop following my orders." So yes, if a gray hat general or gray hat president breaks their oath, but then continues to command people or write laws that control people, then effectively they're being a controller, who violates free will. And that is certainly something that we can drag them in front of a galactic court for. Of course, we're not saying that these people are automatically guilty. We're just saying that this is sufficient basis for a court case. Second, as I'll explain later in this message in more detail, we're either going to not intervene directly and also not arrest the higher-up gray hats, or we are going to intervene directly and are also going to arrest the higher-up gray hats as well as black hats. With intervene, we mean something like us taking over your mainstream media and/or us arresting certain Earth humans. So what we're not going to do is arrest the higher-up gray hats, while leaving the black hats in place. Next up, some people have asked, what right do you have to intervene like this at all? Well, good question. On Earth, the way it's theoretically supposed to work is that the law determines what does and doesn't happen. Now, this isn't actually true. What determines what happens on Earth is power and money and the will to act. In practice, the law is more a tool that the dark controllers use to control the population, with the dark controllers themselves breaking the law whenever that's convenient for them. But theoretically, the law determines what does and doesn't happen. How it works for us positive galactics is that first and foremost, we serve Source. And this isn't theoretical lip service. Many of us can literally talk to Source and ask it what it wants. Now, usually Source is very hands-off and doesn't give any instructions. However, if Source requests that we do something, then that's what we're going to do. If Source doesn't have any requests, then secondarily we have a very few galactic laws. We find that if you structure society well and everyone has what they need and if everyone can live in freedom, then you don't need many laws. Still, one example of a galactic law is, you are not allowed to directly harm another, unless you have a very good reason, for example self-defense or defending the innocent. Also, we know that Source likes certain things such as people having much opportunity to exercise their free will. Us galactics try to promote those things that Source likes. There is a misconception that Source doesn't have any preferences whatsoever. This isn't true. If that was the case, Source would never have created anything in the first place. Now, yes, Source is usually hands-off. However, Source does for example like it when people have much opportunity to exercise their free will. Someone who has much opportunity to exercise their free will is someone who you would think of as free. Conversely, an example of someone with little opportunity to exercise their free will is a slave. A slave can disobey their master, but then they are punished or killed. Technically no one can take your free will away from you, but people certainly can restrict the opportunities you have to exercise your free will. Source prefers people being free to being enslaved, or in other words Source likes it when people have much opportunity to exercise their free will. Why? Because Source is the poor person who is enslaved. Moreover, both the individual person, as well as the universe at large, experience more metaphorical growth when people have much opportunity to exercise their free will. The universe is more interesting when everyone has much opportunity to make free will choices. A universe where only a few masters have much ability to choose, and everyone else is a slave, isn't very interesting and doesn't lead to a lot of metaphorical growth. Source isn't opposed to there being some amount of suffering in a certain place for a certain period of time, that too leads to growth, but it certainly can also be the case that Source thinks that a certain place has had too much suffering for too long. Earth is one such example. So we've discussed direct requests by Source, galactic law and us galactics generally trying to promote things that Source likes. Fourth, of course us positive galactics like it when people are free and people aren't suffering. Taxation and censorship on Earth both look like free will violations to us. Not to mention that dark controllers sometimes intentionally poison your food and water, and sometimes just straight up murder people who become inconvenient. So there are clear free will violations. People also don't have a real ability to not consent, or to get justice when their free will is violated. Hence many Earth humans have directly asked us galactics to intervene, and indeed, that is what many of us would very much like to do. We want to end your suffering and to physically meet our Earth brothers and sisters. We know that every day that passes, billions of people suffer, and some children literally get tortured or killed. We want to end this. So to recap, us galactics are in service to Source. If Source directly requests that we do something, then we do it. If Source doesn't make a direct request, which is usually the case, then we follow galactic law. We also try to do things that we know Source will like, such as making sure that people have much opportunity to exercise their free will. And of course, we like it when people are free and aren't suffering. Let's look at Earth through this lens. Has Source made a direct request? Yes, Source has asked us to help make sure that the people of Earth will be free in the near future. That, by itself, gives us enough justification to intervene on Earth, and to do what we think needs to be done in order to ensure that the people on earth are indeed free. Following or serving a deity has gotten a bad reputation on earth, because frankly a lot of your deities are either gray or dark beings, and on top of that certain people falsely claim to speak for certain deities. However, following or serving Source is actually fine and works well, because Source isn't evil and doesn't lead people down dark paths. Also, once you have a substantial group of people who can talk to Source like we have, people can no longer falsely claim to speak for Source. So Source has requested that we help Earth humans, and so we shall, and this overrides galactic law. Still, let's look at galactic law anyway. Is there a galactic law that says that we can't intervene? No, there is not. We don't actually have a non-interference law. We don't have something like the Prime Directive from Star Trek. Why would we make a law that says we can't intervene to help other people at all, in any circumstance? It's easy to think of examples where intervention is clearly necessary and thus this law would lead to other people suffering for no reason. Therefore, why would we make such a law? That said, we do want to do things that Source likes. And in this category, it is true that if the people on a certain planet have a reasonable amount of freedom, then us intervening may very well limit their opportunities to exercise their own free will. Namely, even if we hand a moderately free people technology or knowledge that reduces their daily chores and that should theoretically give them more opportunity to exercise their free will, then in practice this can lead to an eventual collapse which actually reduces their opportunity to exercise their free will. Atlantis is an example. We handed you too much technology and knowledge too quickly, and we solved too many of your problems for you, and the resulting society wasn't stable and it collapsed. Whereas we have observed that if a group of people solves their own problems, then they'll build a society that is stable. Because of this, we tend to be hesitant about directly intervening. It's easy to point to people suffering and say, therefore we must intervene. Many galactics have made this argument over the millennia. However, can you even comprehend the amount of suffering that was caused by us galactics over-intervening during the times of Atlantis and contributing to that fall? If we hadn't over-intervened back then, today you would likely be living in a sort of paradise already. Us over-intervening in Atlantis led to millennia of suffering. Because of this, we are very careful to not over-intervene. So, with regards to Earth, our primary objective is to make sure that you are free, because that's what Source has decreed. There is no galactic law that stops us from intervening directly, and even if there was, we prioritize requests by Source over galactic law. However, we are aware that us intervening directly can lead to a situation that isn't stable, which in turn can lead to a lot of suffering. Us intervening doesn't always lead to instability, but it can lead to it. Whereas if Earth people solve their own problems, they will build a society that is stable. With us intervening directly, we are talking about something like us taking over your mainstream media, and or us arresting certain Earth humans. We are not talking about the solar flash, because we can't trigger the solar flash by ourselves. Source can do that by itself, or us galactics can do that in combination with angels and certain celestial bodies. But so far, neither Source, nor the angels and the celestial bodies have given their thumbs up for triggering the solar flash. Hence at this specific point in time, we don't have the option to trigger the solar flash, although this can change quickly, if other beings change their mind. Hence the choice that we have is, do we intervene or not? If you had talked to us 10 years ago, we would have explained this and concluded that we should support Earth humans and solve hard-to-address problems for them, such as dealing with hostile galactics. However, back then there was a good probability that Earth humans would free themselves. Therefore, 10 years ago, it seemed clear to us that we shouldn't intervene ourselves, beyond support in solving hard-to-address problems. Instead we should let Earth humans liberate Earth humans, and let Earth humans build a new society, which would then be guaranteed to be stable. Today the possibility that you will free yourselves is substantially lower. While you light workers have performed very well and have done your part, the gray hats really haven't been doing their share of the work. While we are in favor of peaceful citizen protest, we are not expecting a sudden huge wave of that. Moreover, even at times and in places where that did happen, it's not like the people got their freedom back. The dark controllers aren't going to give up just because of protests, or just because some people make certain legal or lawfulness arguments. At the end of the day, the situation on Earth won't end until some people simply arrest the dark controllers. There is still a probability that the gray hats will finally arrest the dark controllers, but currently that probability is low. In fact, the current probability of Earth humans freeing themselves is low enough that it's actually close to the point that would lead us to conclude that we have to intervene ourselves. Which would mean us taking over your media and/or us arresting certain bad guys, and risking possible instability that might result from that. There are several reasons for why we have become more pessimistic about Earth humans freeing themselves. One of them is Lahaina and the corresponding lack of action, disclosure, and help from the gray hats. You may also recall that in years past, there was some amount of optimism among lightworkers that bad guys would be arrested soonish and disclosure would happen, but this optimism has diminished over time. Well, our optimism has diminished over time too. Now, to be sure, it has always been true that you will be free, and that is still true today. That is not in question. There is no future scenario under which you are not going to be free. It's just a matter of, will humanity free itself, or do we have to intervene and risk possible instability from that? We have already stepped up our behind-the-scenes operations even more. Also, Hawkins' message from last week was an attempt to encourage humanity to free itself. And some higher-up gray hats have indeed seen Hawkins' message, although they haven't taken the action yet that we were hoping for. Again, gray hats, if you feel that you need help with the mass arrests and disclosure, then talk to us and we'll happily give you all the support you need. Still, we may have to intervene at some point. An intervention by us could happen from anywhere between October 2023 to somewhere in 2026, although there is a small probability that it will be later than 2026, and an intervention in 2023 is unlikely. If we intervene, then most likely that is going to be in 2024, 2025, or 2026. I understand that many of you are suffering every day, so we do understand that intervening sooner rather than later would be a very good thing. Every cycle Hawkins spends time with his family, and when he resumes work, the first thing he checks is if there's any sign of Earth humans having made a substantial move towards freeing themselves. We are still hoping that you will free yourselves. And if you do free yourselves, we don't need to drag any of the higher-up gray hats in front of a galactic court, either for regular crimes or for oath-breaking. In this case, we would just be hands-off and we would happily let humanity make its own choices. But if I'm being blunt, the probability of you freeing yourself at this point is pretty low and it's also dropping over time. Meanwhile, the situation on Earth can't even be described as awful but stable. As you know better than I do, things are getting worse on Earth, not better. The dark controllers are ramping up their attacks on the human population. So we're seeing things deteriorate while we're not seeing the gray hats ramp up their own efforts to anywhere near a sufficient extent. Don't get me wrong, the gray hats are doing some things, but not nearly to the level that we think is required. If the choice is between directly intervening ourselves versus watching you get genocide and enslaved, well, I think the choice is obvious. So if the probability of you freeing yourself drops below a certain point, or if too much time passes, then we will intervene. Source has decreed that you will be free, and if that requires our direct intervention, then so shall it be. If we intervene, we are likely going to arrest most or all of the higher-up gray hats, either for conventional crimes or for oath-breaking. And we'll drag them in front of a galactic court. And of course, we'll arrest the black hats too, and we'll work to give you freedom and disclosure. Because frankly, from our point of view, it's starting to look like both gray hats and black hats are standing in the way of your freedom. I would love to be proven wrong by the gray hats remembering their oaths and actually defending the people or the Constitution, but so far I'm not seeing it. Finally, I would like to ask you a question. Obviously we have our own data and methods of gathering information and ways of predicting the future, but we are still curious about your perspective. The question is, suppose there is no direct galactic intervention or solar flash in the next 3 years. Then do you think that in the next 3 years, Earth humans are going to free themselves through mass arrests and mass disclosure? You are invited to respond in the comments section. Meanwhile, I will keep making arguments in favor of us actually intervening on Earth. Now, I'm just a military advisor, and I don't have a big red "Intervene Now" button that I can press. Still, I promise that I will do what I can to work for your freedom. With love, your galactic brother, 𝐂𝐶.